All right, so let's look. How do we rotate a triangle 90 degrees counterclockwise around the point 1, 2? The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to label my point 1, 2 with some colors. Because remember that in order to calculate each point based on the center of rotation, I'm going to be subtracting my x value of my point from my x value of each of my points of my triangle. So for m, I'm going to be subtracting 1 from -3, which will give me -4. For k, I'm going to subtract 1 from 2, which will give me -3. And for L, I'm going to subtract 1 from 1, which is going to give me 0. Now that I've subtracted the x values, I can also subtract the y values. Again, we're trying to bring our point back to 0, 0 so that we can rotate it. Okay, so we're going to subtract 2 from each of our y values. And then when I do 1 take away 2, it's going to give me -1. When I do 5 take away 2, it's going to give me 3. And when I do 1 take away 2, it's going to give me -1. So now that I've done all of these subtractions that I needed to do to move my points so that they're rotating about an origin, oops, that didn't work exactly how I wanted it. Now I can move on to step 2, which is going to be to rotate each point based on the rule provided, which we'll review where we found that in just a second. So like I explained before, we're using the rule, which we pulled from our different rules, that tells us when we're rotating 90 degrees counterclockwise, we're going to move our point after moving it the first time, -yx. And what that means is we're going to flip the value of y to be a negative, or we're going to flip the sign, and then we're going to actually put it where typically x would go. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. We're going to call our new point M prime, because remember, whenever we are making a new point, we should be labeling it with a prime. That means that it has moved. And now let's go through and let's actually label our new points and accurately complete them. So for the first one, for M, I have -1 was my point before. So the first thing is I need to flip the sign based on my rule. So the opposite of -1 is +1. But now instead of it being where the y typically is, it's going to be where the x typically is. So instead of -1, I'm going to have +1. Instead of where I would have y, I have x now. Okay? Next, I'm going to just rewrite my x term, but where y should have been. So we're flipping it like our rule tells us. Okay? So my M prime, or my new location of M for my triangle, after it has been translated, is going to be 1, -4. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with my L point, or my K point. So the inverse of 3, or the opposite of 3, would be -3. And then remember, I'm putting that -3 now where x used to be. And my y remains the same term, but now is my old x value. Finally, I'm going to do the same thing with L. I'm going to flip -1 to +1, put it where my x used to be, and I'm going to write my 0 over here where my y used to be. One thing I just noticed on here is that it looks like I wrote an M, an L where the M should have been, so this is an M. Okay, so that is it for that step for now. All right, so let's go ahead and finish step 3. And step 3 says to add our rotation point to the points we found on step 2. So the rotation point again is 1, 2. So on step 1, we subtracted it. And on step 3, we're actually going to add it back in. Okay, so we now have our point M prime, we have K prime, and we have L prime. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill in by adding our numbers from our rotation point. Okay, so the first one, let's go ahead and add our numbers back in here. So to 1, we're going to add 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. To -3, we're going to add 1. -3 plus 1 is -2. And 1 plus 1 is 2. So again, for each of these, I was adding our rotation number back in. And that's how I found that. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with our x value, or our y value. So here we should be adding 2 to each of these terms because 2 was our number from our rotation point. And -4 plus 2 would give me -2. -3 plus 2 gives me -1, and 0 plus 2 gives me 2. Okay, so here I was able to add my rotation point back in, and now I have points M, K, and L, M prime, K prime, L prime, and now I can graph them. So for M prime, I'm going to go over 2 and down 2. I'm going to graph this point as M prime. For point 2, point K, I'm going to go left 2 and down 1. This is point K prime. And then my last one, L prime, is over 2 and up 2. And this is point L prime. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my dots with a line. I'm going to make my line a little bit smaller. And this is my new triangle, a rotation around the point 2, 1, 2 of 90 degrees counterclockwise. That is how we do the process, and that is how the final answer would look.